When I was in high school, I had two close friends named Jason and Brian. The three of us were inseparable. We weren't popular or athletic or anything like that. We were just bored kids in a small town who spent most of our time wandering around, killing time until something interesting happened. After graduation, Jason's dad got transferred for work, and his entire family moved down to Lexington, South Carolina. We stayed in touch, but it wasn't the same. A few months later, Jason invited Brian and me to come down and stay with him for a weekend. We didn't hesitate. None of us had anything going on, and the idea of getting out of town sounded perfect. Jason's new house sat on the edge of a rural area. Lots of trees, lots of open land, and very few neighbors. The first day was normal. We hung out, caught up, stayed up late talking about nothing. The second day, out of pure boredom, we decided to explore the nearby woods and countryside. Not far from Jason's house, we found a scenic river cutting through the forest. It was quiet and peaceful, the kind of place where the air feels heavier and sound doesn't travel very far. We followed the river for a while, hopping over rocks and fallen trees, not really paying attention to direction. That was our first mistake. After maybe an hour, we realized we didn't recognize anything around us anymore. The river curved and split in ways we didn't remember. We couldn't tell which way was upstream or downstream. The woods all looked the same, and there were no roads, no houses, no sounds of traffic, no cell service either. We started getting nervous. We decided the smartest thing to do was to keep following the river, hoping it would eventually lead us somewhere populated. After another long stretch of walking, we came across something that didn't belong. It was an old church-like building made of dark red bricks. The structure looked ancient, surrounded by thick brush and vines that had clearly been growing unchecked for years. There was a dirt parking lot out front, and a narrow dirt road leading up to it. In the parking lot sat 4 old cars parked side by side. They looked like they were from the 70s or 80s, maybe old Novas. All of them were white, or at least they used to be. Rust ate through the panels, tires were flat or missing entirely, and weeds had grown up around them. As we got closer, we heard singing. Gospel music. It was faint but unmistakable. Multiple voices, slow and steady. Relief washed over us. People meant help. A phone. Directions. We walked up to the building and pushed the heavy doors open. Inside, the place was dim and worn down. Wooden pews. Peeling paint. A woman with white hair and thick horn-rimmed glasses sat at an old piano near the front, playing. There were maybe 24 people seated inside. They were dressed as nicely as they could be, but it was obvious they didn't have much. Worn clothes, scuffed shoes, everything looked outdated. The moment we stepped inside, the piano stopped. The woman turned her head and stared at us. No expression, no curiosity, just empty. Then something happened that I will never forget. Every single person in that church stopped singing at the same time. They slowly put down their song sheets, one by one, and turned their heads toward us. All of them. Their expressions were vacant, cold, and deeply unwelcoming. Jason spoke up, his voice shaking. He said we were sorry to interrupt and asked if we could use a phone to call his parents so they could come get us. No one answered. The silence was oppressive. You could hear the pews creak under their weight. No coughing, no shuffling, nothing. We slowly backed toward the door and stepped outside without turning our backs. Once the door shut, the three of us looked at each other, fear fully setting in. We started walking up the dirt road. Brian quietly pointed out that there hadn't been any crosses or religious symbols inside. We turned around. About a dozen men had exited the church and were standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching us. They didn't wave. They didn't speak. They just stared. We ran. We sprinted up that dirt road for what felt like forever. Our lungs burned. Our legs ached. We didn't stop until we reached an old broken-down gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 60s. Inside, the shelves were dusty and mostly empty. Behind the counter stood an older man with dark leathery skin and a filthy baseball cap. He was reading a book with yellowed, ragged pages.
You boys lost?
We nodded. He gave us directions in a slow, almost amused tone. Then, as we walked away, we looked back. He was standing outside the gas station now, arms folded, grinning at us with a mouth full of rotten teeth. We followed his directions and eventually reached a highway, just as it got dark. A police officer finally stopped and drove us back to Jason's house. On the way, he told us to be careful out there. He said there were witch folks in those woods. Years later, another experience reinforced my belief that certain places attract certain kinds of people. When I was 19, two friends of mine, James and Sean, convinced me to explore an abandoned church near our town in New Jersey. It sat at the top of a hill on a closed-off road, and had been abandoned for years. Sean brought a Ouija board. It was October. We thought it was funny, spooky season and all that. We parked and walked up the hill with one flashlight. The church was surrounded by woods on all sides. The front door was already ajar, scraping loudly as we pushed it open. Inside, it was pitch black. Sean set up the Ouija board and placed 3 candles in a triangle around it. Once lit, we turned off our flashlights. The only light came from the flickering flames. We started asking questions. At first, the planchette moved, and we laughed. We assumed one of us was doing it. Then we heard a loud cracking noise near the altar, like a thick piece of wood snapping in half. We shined our lights. Nothing. We kept going, then something landed on the Ouija board. A rock, about the size of a golf ball. None of us had moved. We ran. The next day, Sean returned to retrieve the board. It was gone. The candles were still there. The final story is the one that still makes me sick. When I was 8 years old, I was a Cub Scout. Our meetings were held at a Catholic elementary school. A few days earlier, during Mass, I noticed an older man standing against the wall, staring at me. He smiled and made exaggerated faces. It felt wrong. My mom noticed too. During a Cub Scout meeting later that week, we had a scavenger hunt. I wandered into a narrow hallway near the cafeteria and grabbed an ice cream pop from a freezer. That man appeared beside me. He told me not to let anyone see. He grabbed my hand and said he had better treats in the back. I yelled. He let go. I ran. It turned out he worked for the church. Later, allegations came out. I don't know what happened to him. I just know what could have. Some places wear familiar faces, schools, churches, community spaces, and sometimes the most horrifying thing isn't what's hiding in the dark, it's what's standing in plain sight, waiting for permission.